The rain began before dawn, the kind that doesn't fall hard but seeps quietly into everything, soaking the world in a slow sadness. It was the morning of the funeral. A small girl, barely 8, stood by the window of a cramped house, her fingers pressed against the glass as the sky wept with her. Her name was Lily. Her eyes, swollen and red, looked out into a world that suddenly felt too big, too cold, too empty. Her mother was gone. The only warmth she had ever known now lay inside a wooden box covered in flowers that didn't smell sweet anymore. The scent of lilies made her stomach turn, for they reminded her not of life but of endings. Around her, people moved in slow motion, whispering, sighing, pretending to comfort, but no one really seeing her. Not really. Her stepfather, Mark, stood stiffly by the coffin, his face unreadable. He had been kind once, or at least that's what Lily's mother had believed. But in the weeks leading to her passing, something had shifted. The gentle tone turned into resentment, the looks into blame. And now, without her mother's fragile protection, Lily felt the house itself turning hostile. When the funeral ended, the mourners left one by one, until the only sounds left were the rain on the roof and the soft creak of the old wooden floor. Mark didn't say a word. He simply gathered his things and hers. The soft pink backpack her mother had bought her for school lay at her feet. When he handed it to her, something inside her knew what was coming. By sunset, the house was no longer hers. He shut the door behind her without looking back. The lock clicked like the sound of finality. Quiet, brutal, complete. She stood there in the rain, clutching the backpack that carried her only world. A photo of her mother, a small dress, and a worn-out teddy bear with one missing eye. She walked without knowing where to go. The world blurred, streets merging into darkness, her shoes soaked through, her heart beating against her ribs in panic. Cars passed without slowing. Faces turned away. No one wanted to see a lost little girl because seeing meant feeling, and feeling meant pain. Hours passed. The rain stopped. Night came. She found a small bench under an old oak tree near the city park and curled up there, trying to remember her mother's voice. It wasn't the words that haunted her. It was the tone. The warmth. The way it made her feel like she belonged somewhere. That night, she fell asleep hungry, cold, and frightened, dreaming of arms that would never hold her again. Morning light broke softly, washing the world in pale gold. A man walking briskly down the path toward his car noticed her, a small figure wrapped in a soaked jacket far too big for her. He stopped, something tightening in his chest. He had seen sorrow before, and the world had shown him plenty, but not like this. His name was William Hartman, a name often spoken with respect, even envy. He was a man of power, of wealth, a millionaire whose every step was followed by those who wanted something from him. But at that moment, looking at the girl sleeping on the bench, he didn't feel rich. He felt hollow. Something about her fragile stillness pulled at him, like a forgotten memory he couldn't quite reach. Her face, pale, delicate, angelic even, stirred something deep inside. For a long moment, he simply stood there, unable to move. He had known loss, too. Years ago, he'd lost the love of his life, a woman whose smile had once made the world brighter. He had searched for her after she disappeared from his life, only to learn she had died young, leaving behind nothing but a few faint traces of memory. And now, before him, was a girl who somehow looked like her. When Lily opened her eyes, frightened by the shadow hovering above her, she saw not danger, but something she hadn't seen in days: kindness. William bent slightly, his expression softening. In that moment, something shifted in him and in her. Two broken souls, bound by loss, unknowingly standing at the edge of a story that would change them both forever. The morning sun cast long beams across the park, catching the glimmer of a tear that fell silently down his cheek. He didn't know yet who she was, or what painful truth tied their lives together, but his heart whispered something his mind could not explain. He could not walk away. As Lily looked up, shivering and lost, William extended his hand, a simple, silent gesture that would mark the beginning of everything that followed. The wind rustled through the leaves as if the world itself had paused, waiting. Somewhere, the faint sound of church bells echoed, as if destiny had just begun to stir. And as the morning light touched both their faces, something, fragile but certain, took root between them. Neither of them knew yet that their lives were already intertwined by the choices of the past, that the woman William
had once loved was the very same woman Lily had called
Mom, but fate knew, and it was about to reveal everything, one truth at a time. As William lifts the trembling girl into his car, he notices the photograph falling from her backpack, a faded image of a young woman smiling in the sunlight. His breath catches. He knows that face. The car moved slowly through the quiet streets, its headlights cutting soft lines through the mist. Inside, Lily sat huddled against the door, her small fingers wrapped tightly around the strap of her backpack. Her eyes followed the raindrops tracing paths across the window. Silent, cautious, uncertain. The world outside seemed distant, like a dream she no longer belonged to. William kept glancing at her through the rearview mirror. Something about her stillness felt hauntingly familiar, yet he couldn't place why. Her face, pale, delicate, and sorrowful, carried a quiet strength that unsettled him in ways he didn't understand. She wasn't just another lost child. There was something deeper there, something that reached into the part of him he had buried long ago. When the car finally stopped, it was in front of a grand house set on a quiet hill. Tall windows, ivy climbing up the stone walls, the kind of home built not for comfort but for distance. The mansion was a symbol of success, of everything William had built after losing the woman he once loved. Yet it had never felt like a home. He led Lily inside. The warmth of the fireplace met the chill of her clothes, the flicker of light casting long shadows across the marble floor. She stood near the doorway, afraid to move, afraid to break something that looked too expensive to exist. For the first time in her short life, she felt both safe and terribly out of place. William noticed the photograph on the floor near the car as he returned to close the door. When he picked it up, the breath caught in his throat. The edges were worn, the image faded, but the face, the smile, the eyes, they were unmistakable. It was her, Emma. The woman who had once held his heart so completely that losing her had left him hollow. He had searched for her for years, following rumors and traces, only to learn she had married someone else, a man named Mark, and then died soon after. He had never forgiven himself for letting her go. Now, staring at this small photograph in his trembling hand, he realized the little girl standing quietly in his hallway carried her face. The same eyes, the same gentle sadness. The room seemed to blur for a moment. His heart, long buried under layers of success and solitude, began to stir again. Lily, unaware of the storm within him, looked around the room with hesitant curiosity. The walls were lined with framed moments of a life she couldn't imagine. Business awards, news headlines, smiling faces she didn't recognize. Everything gleamed. Everything seemed perfect. Yet beneath the shine there was a stillness, a kind of loneliness that mirrored her own. William watched her, wondering what fate had done. The daughter of the woman he had loved most in the world, abandoned, lost, left to sleep on a park bench. The thought tightened something deep in his chest. He didn't ask questions that night. He didn't need to. Her silence spoke louder than any story could. He simply made sure she had food, warmth, and a bed that didn't smell of damp and fear. When she lay down, clutching the teddy bear close to her chest, William stood at the doorway watching her fall asleep, the faint light from the hallway softening the lines of her small, tired face. In her sleep she murmured something and a name. It was soft, broken, almost swallowed by her breathing, but he heard it. Mommy. The word pierced through him. He turned away, unable to stand the sound of that kind of grief, the kind that had no answer. That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat by his study window, staring out into the dark garden, the photograph on his desk illuminated by the faint light of a single lamp. He ran his thumb along the edge of the photo again and again, as if touching the paper might bring her back. So many questions crowded his mind. Why had Emma never told him about this child? Why had she vanished? Why had she ended up with Mark, a man who would abandon her daughter? And most of all, how could fate have brought her child back to him after all these years in this way? The more he thought, the more the ache inside him grew. His wealth, his success, his carefully built life, all of it felt meaningless now. The past had come knocking again, in the shape of a frightened little girl who carried the memory of everything he had lost. By morning, he made a silent decision, one that would change everything. He would protect her. He would find out what happened to Emma, and why this child had been left alone in the world. When Lily woke up, sunlight streamed through the curtains. For a moment she forgot where she was, the softness of the bed, the warmth of the sheets, the faint smell of lavender. It all felt too kind, too distant from the world she knew. William watched her from the doorway again, a quiet determination forming behind his weary eyes. He would find her stepfather. He would uncover the truth. But most importantly, he would make sure this child never knew that kind of fear again. As Lily stood near the window, looking out at the garden filled with golden morning light, she clutched the photo of her mother close. Somewhere deep down she felt something shifting too, a fragile thread of hope she didn't dare believe in yet. But life has a way of giving before it takes again. Later that day, as William began to make quiet inquiries into Emma's past, he discovered the first trace, a name that made his blood run cold. Mark. The same man he had once met years ago in a business negotiation, charming on the surface, but deceitful beneath it all. Fate, it seemed, wasn't done tying knots between the past and the present. And as evening fell over the house, Lily sat by the fireplace, unaware that the man who had saved her from the streets was about to uncover the truth about her mother's final years and the betrayal that destroyed her life. In the glow of the fire, the photograph rested between them, a bridge between two worlds, two hearts, and two unfinished stories waiting to meet again. As William's investigator calls with information about Emma's last days, a single phrase chills. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in strokes of amber and fading rose. Inside the grand house, William sat in the dim glow of his study, the phone still pressed to his ear long after the call had ended. The investigator's words echoed through him, sharp and hollow. She didn't die the way they said she did. For years he had lived with the belief that Emma's death had been a quiet tragedy, an illness, a gentle slipping away from the world. But now that fragile truth had cracked open. Behind it lay something darker, something that had been hidden. William leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the photograph of Emma and the little girl who bore her eyes. He thought of the day he had met her, how light had poured through the cafe window as she smiled over a cup of coffee, her laughter soft and unguarded. She had been full of dreams then, speaking of life and love as though the world could still be kind. And now, years later, all that remained was this child abandoned and broken, carrying the weight of secrets she didn't even know existed. He could almost hear Emma's voice in the quiet room, not in words, but in feeling. The echo of warmth, the ache of distance. It wasn't fair, he thought, that love could linger even after the person who gave it was gone. Outside, the wind picked up, stirring the trees. Somewhere down the hall, Lily's soft footsteps crossed the wooden floor. She had begun to move more freely now, less afraid of making noise. It had taken her only a day to start trusting the silence of this house, a silence that, for years, had been William's own prison. She stood at the door of the study, holding her teddy bear, uncertain if she was allowed to enter. William turned toward her, the lines of exhaustion softening on his face. She was small against the doorway, her hair still tangled from sleep, her eyes watchful but not empty anymore. He gestured gently for her to come in. She walked closer, standing by the edge of his desk, her gaze caught by the photograph lying there. She reached for it with hesitant fingers, tracing the image of the woman smiling in sunlight. William watched her, a deep ache tightening in his chest. He didn't tell her who the woman was, not yet. She was too young to carry the weight of that truth, too fragile to bear the story that had already stolen her childhood. Instead, he simply watched her in silence, realizing that she carried more of Emma than just her face. There was something in her stillness and that quiet endurance, that softness even after pain, that was hers alone. That night, after Lily had fallen asleep, William called the investigator again. The voice on the other end spoke carefully, unfolding pieces of a story that made his blood run cold. Emma's final years had been marked by fear and by control. Mark, the man who had promised to love her, had instead isolated her. There were hospital visits, unexplained bruises, a sudden move to a small town far from anyone she knew. And then, a death certificate that raised too many questions and answered none. The more William listened, the more he felt the walls of his heart tremble. He had failed her once, by letting her go, by believing the world would be kind to her. Now it was too late to save her, but maybe through Lily, he could make things right. For days, the house grew quieter as William searched for truth and purpose. He canceled meetings, ignored calls, and spent hours tracing every lead the investigator uncovered. In the spaces between, he found himself watching Lily, how she began to explore the garden, how she lingered near the flowers as though they reminded her of someone. Each time she smiled, something inside him thawed a little more, but peace, he knew, was fragile. And the past had a way of finding those who tried to outrun it. One afternoon, as he returned from a meeting with a lawyer about potential custody arrangements, he noticed a dark sedan parked across the street. The driver's window rolled down slightly as he approached his gate, revealing a pair of eyes he recognized. Cold, calculating, familiar Mark. It had been years since he'd seen him, the man who had once stood across a boardroom table, smooth-talking and deceptive, a man whose charm always smelled faintly of danger. Now, seeing him again, William understood everything the investigator hadn't yet said. Mark had never truly let go of control. That night, the tension in the house was palpable. Lily sensed it, even if she didn't understand why. William paced the length of his study, his thoughts colliding between fear and fury. The truth was within reach now, but so was danger. When he finally looked out the window, the car was gone, but the feeling remained, the sharp edge of being watched. He turned back toward the hallway, where Lily's small shoes sat neatly by the stairs. For the first time in years, he felt something stronger than anger. He felt purpose. He would not let history repeat itself. As the night deepened, William sat by the fireplace, the photograph still on the mantel. He thought of Emma, of the last words she had written to him before disappearing, a letter he had never opened. It still sat, sealed and yellowed, in a drawer upstairs. He had been too afraid then. Afraid of what it might say, afraid of what he might have lost. Now, as the fire flickered low, he rose and went to find it. The envelope was fragile in his hands, the ink faded but clear. When he broke the seal and unfolded the letter, his hands trembled. The words were few but piercing. She had written of love, of fear, of a child she had yet to name, and of regret for not telling him sooner. If you ever find her, the letter ended, love her enough for both of us. Tears blurred his vision as he read the last line again and again, the weight of it pressing into his heart. He looked toward the staircase where Lily slept in the guest room, unaware of the promise that had just been reborn in that quiet house. Outside, the wind howled through the trees like a warning. Somewhere in the distance, the low hum of an engine idled and then faded into the night. The shadows were moving closer. As William sets the letter down beside the photo, his phone vibrates with a new message from the investigator. We found something in Emma's medical records, and it points directly to Mark. The following morning rose gray and heavy, as though the world itself hesitated to begin the day. The clouds hung low, veiling the sun, muting every color. Inside the house, a stillness lingered, not peaceful, but waiting. William sat at his desk, the investigator's report open before him. Each page felt heavier than the last. Every line he read drew him deeper into a truth he wished he could unsee. The words were clinical, cold, medical notes, incident logs, police statements. But between those lines was a story of pain, the silent suffering of a woman who had once been full of life. Emma's final months had not been peaceful. The evidence was undeniable. Bruises dismissed as accidents, fractures left untreated, a pattern of isolation, of fear, and then the final entry, cardiac arrest under unknown circumstances. Unknown. William's chest tightened. The word rang like a wound. He knew what it meant, not mystery, but avoidance. Someone had wanted her story buried before anyone could ask questions. He ran his hand across his face, the weight of it all pressing down. For years he had lived with guilt for letting her go. Now guilt turned into rage, not just for what had happened to her, but for the child who had been left behind because of it. In the living room, Lily sat cross-legged on the floor, a coloring book open before her. She had begun to hum softly in a melody William recognized. He froze in the doorway, the sound pulling at something deep within him. It was a lullaby, the same one Emma used to hum when they would sit by the lake years ago, watching the ripples catch the light. How could Lily know it? He stood there listening until she looked up and offered a shy, uncertain smile. It was then he understood. Emma had taught her. She had passed down pieces of herself, fragments of love hidden in small moments, enough to survive even after everything else was lost. William smiled faintly, forcing calm into his voice, though the storm within him grew darker. He couldn't let her see his anger, his fear. She needed peace, not truth. Not yet. Later that afternoon, he met with the investigator in person. They sat in a quiet cafe, far from the polished corners of the city. The man slid a small folder across the table. Inside were photographs, copies of Emma's hospital records, and one image that made William's hands tremble. It showed a bruised wrist marked faintly with the outline of fingers. It wasn't an accident. It had never been. The investigator's voice was low. It appears the attending doctor was pressured to sign off on the death certificate quickly. There were financial transfers made to his account a week later, traced back to a company Mark owned. William's heart pounded in his ears. He didn't speak. The world around him blurred into a haze of sound and motion. He could feel the edges of fury closing in, not the kind that lashes out, but the kind that waits, sharp and quiet. Mark had not only taken Emma's peace, he had taken her life. When William returned home, the house felt different. The silence was heavier. Every shadow seemed to carry weight. Lily was asleep on the couch, her tiny hand clutching the teddy bear like a lifeline. He sat beside her, lowering himself carefully so as not to wake her. For a long while, he just watched her breathe. Each rise and fall of her chest reminded him of what still existed, of what he could still protect. Emma was gone, but her child was here, and he would not fail her again. He made a silent vow that night. Mark would never touch her, never find her, never take from her what he had taken from Emma. But fate has a way of testing every promise made in silence. The next morning, the sound of a car engine broke the calm. It stopped at the gate. The doorbell rang once sharply. William's heart froze. He knew before he even looked. Mark stood at the doorstep. Time had not softened him. His face was older, his eyes colder, but the arrogance was unchanged. He smiled faintly, though the smile never reached his eyes. William could see the performance in every inch of him. This was a man who thrived on control, on bending truth until it broke. For a long moment, neither spoke. The air between them felt heavy, electric. The ghosts of the past stood with them. Mark's eyes wandered beyond the doorway, past William's shoulder, into the hall where Lily's small shoes rested by the stairs. Recognition flickered across his face. Not shock, not grief, but calculation. And in that single look, William understood. Mark hadn't come to mourn. He had come to reclaim. He invited himself in, pretending civility, speaking in a measured tone that masked threat beneath it. He claimed he was there for Lily, that he wanted her back, that she was his responsibility. But William could see the truth in his eyes. There was no love there, only ownership. He didn't respond. He didn't argue. He simply stood there silent and immovable, while inside, something ancient and furious burned. When Mark finally left, he did so with a warning, one that carried in his smirk and not in his words. That night, William sat by the fire again, the letter from Emma clutched in his hand. The edges had begun to wear from being held too often. He stared at the flames, feeling their heat on his face, trying to make sense of the darkness closing in. Lily came quietly into the room, rubbing her eyes, her hair tousled from sleep. She climbed onto the armchair beside him without a word, and rested her head against his shoulder. It was a small gesture, but it undid him completely. He placed a trembling hand over hers, realizing that everything he had been searching for, meaning, redemption, peace, was sitting right beside him, in the form of a little girl who still believed in kindness. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. Rain began to fall again, just as it had on the day he found her. But this time, he was ready. He would protect her from the storm, whatever it took. As the rain poured outside, William received an envelope slipped under his door, unmarked, sealed, and damp. Inside was a single photograph of Lily sleeping on the park bench from the photograph lay on the table, its edges curling from the damp. William stared at it in silence, his reflection faintly visible in the glossy surface. Lily, asleep on that cold park bench the night he'd found her, But this photo had been taken from afar, from the shadows. Someone had been watching her, watching them. Outside, the storm pressed against the windows, the wind howling through the trees like an old grief returned. The house that once felt vast now felt small, fragile. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of light seemed to whisper danger. William lifted the photo carefully, his hands steady but his breath uneven. There was no message attached, no name, no signature. But he didn't need one. He knew who had sent it. The same man who had already taken too much. Mark. He walked toward the fireplace, the photo still in hand. The flames flickered low, painting the walls in amber light. He stared into them for a long moment before slipping the photograph into the fire. It curled and blackened, shrinking into nothing but ash. But burning it didn't change the truth. Someone had been close enough to capture that picture, close enough to follow. In the next room, Lily was asleep again, curled up with her teddy bear beneath a blanket. Her breathing was soft, steady. The innocence of it made William's chest ache. He moved to her side quietly, adjusting the blanket as though it could shield her from everything the world had failed to. He had faced power before, men who lied, cheated, threatened. But this was different. This was personal. This was about love, about the one person he had left to protect. As the storm raged through the night, William barely slept. Every sound drew his attention. Every gust of wind made him rise and check the locks again. Memories of Emma haunted him. The fear in her eyes the last time they met. The way she had trembled when she said goodbye. He understood now that she hadn't left by choice. She had been escaping, and she hadn't escaped far enough. By morning, the rain had stopped, but the sky remained heavy and bruised. William stood by the window, watching as the city stirred awake. The phone on his desk vibrated. Another message from the investigator. He's moving fast. Mark filed a petition for custody. He's claiming abandonment, the irony burned. The man who had thrown the child onto the street now dared to demand her back, and the law, blind and indifferent, might listen. William's pulse pounded in his ears. He could see how easily this could unravel. To the world, Mark was still the legal guardian. To the world, William was just a stranger, a wealthy man who had taken in a child that wasn't his. But truth and love rarely lived in paperwork. They lived in what people did when the world wasn't watching, and William knew he would rather lose everything he owned than lose her. That afternoon, he drove to a quiet office on the outskirts of the city. A family lawyer he trusted, one who had known him long before success. The conversation was long, the options limited. Unless they could prove neglect or abuse, Mark would have the law on his side. Evidence. That was what they needed. Proof that Mark had hurt her mother, that he had abandoned the child, that he was unfit. William left the office with a plan. He would uncover what the world had overlooked. Emma had left traces. In hospitals, in neighbors' memories, in files buried beneath Mark's influence. Somewhere among those forgotten details was the truth. But he wasn't the only one searching. That evening, as Lily sat drawing by the window, she looked up and frowned. A car was parked just beyond the gate. Black, silent, the same one William had seen days before. A figure sat behind the wheel, barely visible. William followed her gaze and felt the chill settle deep inside him. He moved to close the curtains gently, not wanting to alarm her. But when he glanced back at the driveway moments later, the car was gone. Night fell quickly after that. The house became an island of dim light surrounded by the darkness of the hills. William worked late, gathering files, making calls, reaching out to old contacts. He barely noticed the time until a sudden noise shattered the silence, a sharp thud against the door. He froze. The clock on the wall read midnight. The sound came again, soft at first, then heavier. He moved toward the door cautiously, his hand hovering near the handle. When he pulled it open, the night air rushed in, cold and sharp. No one stood there. Only an envelope on the steps. He picked it up and tore it open under the hallway light. Inside were two things, a court summons and another photograph. This one was worse. It showed Lily standing in the front yard from earlier that afternoon, smiling, drawing with chalk on the pavement. But taken from behind the gate, someone had been there, watching, waiting, close enough to touch. William's breath caught. For a moment, the world spun and his chest felt like it might collapse under the weight of fear and fury. He gripped the photo so tightly it bent in his hands. He understood the message clearly now. This wasn't just a legal battle. This was a warning. He checked the locks again, checked on Lily again, then sat by her door the rest of the night, awake and listening to every sound. In the morning, the storm clouds broke apart, letting sunlight spill across the hills. To anyone passing by, the house would look peaceful, safe. But inside, the air was thick with unspoken dread. Lily woke smiling, unaware of the danger circling around her. She ran to William, showing him her drawing, a picture of two people holding hands beneath a big yellow sun. A little girl and a man beside her. He took it from her, his eyes softening. In her simple lines, she had drawn the life they were both trying to build, fragile but real. He smiled back, hiding the fear behind his expression. But inside, he knew this was only the calm before the next storm, because men like Mark didn't disappear. They waited. They planned. And when they returned, they did so to destroy what others had built. As the day drew to a close, William stood at the window, watching the long shadows stretch across the lawn. Somewhere beyond those trees, he knew someone was watching too, and when the time came, he would be ready, not just as a protector, but as a father. That night, William's phone buzzed with a final message from the investigator before cutting to silence. "We found the proof you need, but someone else is after it too." Dawn broke quietly over the hills, the pale gold light spilling across the garden like a promise the world was hesitant to keep. The air was still, heavy with the memory of the storm. Inside the house, William sat at his desk, eyes fixed on his phone. The investigator's last message replayed in his mind like an echo he couldn't silence. "We found the proof you need, but someone else is after it too." He had tried calling back through the night. No answer. Only static, then silence. A sick feeling had settled in his chest, the kind of dread that didn't shout, but whispered. He knew what it meant. Mark was moving faster. William rose from his chair and looked toward the hallway where Lily's small footprints still trailed across the polished floor. She was asleep upstairs, safe for now, wrapped in the fragile cocoon of childhood innocence. For a moment, he let that image steady him, her peaceful breathing, her tiny hand curled around the teddy bear. Then he turned toward the truth. By mid-morning, he drove into the city. The streets glistened from the night's rain, the world washed but not clean. He reached the investigator's office, a modest building on the edge of downtown. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the space was quiet, too quiet. Papers scattered across the desk, drawers half open, a faint smell of coffee and something metallic beneath it. The computer still glowed. A single file sat open on the screen. William moved closer, his breath tight in his throat. It was a scanned report, hospital records, emails, and a digital confession signed under Emma's name, written weeks before her death. She had tried to reach out for help. The letter began like an unfinished prayer. She had written about the fear, the control, the bruises she could no longer hide. She wrote of the nights she stayed awake, listening for footsteps, praying her daughter wouldn't wake. And near the end, she mentioned something that stopped William's heart entirely. She wrote about him, not in anger, not in longing, but in hope. She had written that if anything happened to her, she wanted her child, their child, to be found by the only man she had ever trusted. William froze. The words blurred as tears filled his eyes. He had always suspected, deep in the quiet corners of his heart, but seeing it written undeniable broke something inside him. Lily wasn't just Emma's child. She was his. All the years of emptiness, the unanswered questions, the ache he couldn't explain, they suddenly made sense. Emma had loved him still. She had carried their child into a life that became unbearable, hiding her to protect her from the world that had already taken too much. And now, that same world wanted to take her again. He copied every file, every image, every document, and left as quietly as he had arrived. As he stepped into the daylight, he noticed the black sedan parked across the street. The same car, the same eyes behind the glass. Mark was watching. The drive home felt endless, the city stretching like a maze of tension and memory. By the time William reached the hill, The wind had begun to rise again. The storm hadn't passed. It had only paused to gather strength. Lily was waiting by the window when he returned, her small face lighting up when she saw him. She ran to the door, clutching her drawing in one hand. He knelt to meet her, pulling her into his arms. He held her tighter than he ever had, feeling the fragile rhythm of her heartbeat against his chest. He wanted to tell her everything, that she wasn't alone, that she was loved, that she belonged not by chance but by blood. But the truth would come later. For now she only needed safety. He told her to stay inside, to keep close, to trust him. Outside, the sky darkened again. The storm had returned, and with it the sound of tires on wet gravel. The black sedan stopped at the gate. Mark stepped out, rain striking his coat, his expression unreadable but his intent clear. He walked slowly toward the house, uninvited but unafraid. Behind him a lawyer followed, carrying a folder, the official custody order. The law on paper was on his side, but William had something stronger than law now. He had truth. He stepped out onto the porch, the rain soaking his clothes, the file from the investigator clutched in his hand. The wind whipped between them, cold and sharp. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then William extended the folder toward him. The evidence, the confession, the financial records linking Mark to Emma's death. Mark's expression cracked, a flash of panic flickering through the arrogance. William's voice was steady, quiet, resolute. He didn't need to raise it. The truth was louder than anger. Mark turned, muttering threats, but his voice broke beneath the weight of what he'd just seen. He stumbled toward his car, shouting something into his phone. The tires spun in the mud as he fled down the hill, swallowed by the rain. William stood there until the sound of the engine disappeared, his hands trembling, not from fear but from release. It was over. When he walked back inside, Lily was standing by the door, her eyes wide and uncertain. He knelt again, brushing the wet hair from her forehead, and smiled through the exhaustion. That evening, for the first time in years, the house felt warm. The storm faded into silence, the air filled with the scent of rain and renewal. William sat by the fire with Lily curled beside him, her small hand tucked into his. He looked down at her and saw Emma, not the sadness of her past, but the grace of her love. The same love that had carried through years of distance, loss, and fear, only to find its way home in the most unexpected way. He whispered her name in his heart, a promise sealed in quiet gratitude. Outside, the rain slowed to a soft drizzle. The world was still broken, but in that moment something had been mended. Something unseen but real. Days later, the case was closed. The authorities took the evidence, the truth made official. Mark disappeared from their lives like a shadow finally chased away by light. William adopted Lily legally, his name beside hers, and no longer strangers bound by chance, but family bound by truth. He often watched her in the garden, laughing beneath the sunlight, her laughter echoing like a melody from another time, and sometimes when the wind moved just right, he could almost feel Emma there, not gone, but transformed into the gentle warmth that surrounded them both. He kept her letter framed in his study. The last line, faded but eternal, reminded him every day of what love truly means. If you ever find her, love her enough for both of us, and he did. Every day, every heartbeat, every sunrise that followed the storm. Love does not end when life does. It lives on through the hearts we protect, the kindness we give, and the courage to stand for what's right even when the world turns away. Some storms come to destroy, but others to reveal who we were always meant to be. End of story.